Somewhere in the heart of China, there is a place that was being erased from the map, not by bombs, not by war, but by sand. The locals called it Jilan, the wasteland, but the rest of the world had a different name for it, the Sea of Death. This was the Kubuqi Desert, 18,000 square kilometers of cursed burning earth. A place where the wind didn't whisper, it threw sand like weapons. Every single year, 500,000 acres of fertile land were buried alive beneath its dunes. Farms, roads, villages, dreams gone. For the people who had lived here for 100 years, they watched everything they had built slowly dissolve into dust. This wasn't just a desert. This was a living monster. And it was growing. To understand what was happening in Kubuqi, you need to understand something called desertification. It is the most silent killer on this planet. When land loses its vegetation, the topsoil dries out, wind picks it up, carries it away. And without roots holding the earth together, the desert spreads, inch by inch, year by year, like a slow infection, consuming everything in its path. By the 1980s, Kubuqi had become one of the most extreme cases of desertification in human history. The Chinese government had been trying to stop it for decades. They planted trees, they built massive walls. They poured billions of yuan into the problem. Nothing worked. The sand swallowed every wall, every seedling, every effort. The daytime temperature could reach 60 degrees Celsius, hot enough to fry an egg on the ground. At night, it would plunge below freezing. No plant could survive those extremes. No person wanted to stay. By the time the 1980s were ending, the villages surrounding Kubuqi were ghost towns. People weren't just losing their land. They were losing hope. A young man named Wang Wenbiao arrived at the edge of the Kubuqi Desert. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a government official. He was a businessman, stubborn, visionary, and perhaps slightly out of his mind. Where everyone else saw destruction, Wang saw something different. He saw possibility. He knew that conventional methods would never work here. You couldn't fight the desert using the same tools that had already failed. The desert didn't respect tradition. It respected ingenuity. So Wang made a decision that would change the course of history and cost him everything he had. He bet his entire life savings. He hired over 100 bulldozers. He brought in hundreds of workers, and he marched them straight into the most brutal, unforgiving landscape in all of China. And then he started building something that made everyone laugh. Grids. Tiny square frames made from dried shrubs and brush, placed directly on top of the sand, one by one, row by row, across thousands of acres. People thought he was insane. What could a bunch of dried twigs possibly do against an 18,000 square kilometer monster? The answer was everything. These straw grids, checkerboard grids as they came to be known, were a masterstroke of low-tech engineering. The concept was simple. By creating physical barriers on the sand surface, you reduce wind speed at ground level. Sand that was moving stops. It settles. It compacts. And suddenly, for the first time, you have a surface stable enough to plant something in. But what do you plant in a desert? Wang's team searched. They tested dozens of species. Most died within weeks. And then they found it. The salix, a species of willow tree, specially adapted for extreme conditions. This tree is almost supernatural in its survival instincts. When the surface is burning at 60 degrees, its roots will push 300 feet straight down into the earth, hunting for water in underground reservoirs that no other plant can reach. It doesn't ask for rain. It doesn't need fertile soil. It simply refuses to die. But there was a problem. As seedlings, young, fragile, just beginning their lives, these willows were still vulnerable. The desert winds would batter them. The sand would pile against them. Many still died before they could grow strong. Wang needed something else, something that could protect the saplings during their most critical phase. And the answer came from the most unexpected place imaginable: a rabbit. Not just any rabbit, the Rex rabbit. Now I know what you're thinking. A rabbit? To fight a desert? Stay with me. The Rex rabbit has fur so fine, so impossibly soft, that traders had nicknamed it white gold. It was one of the most valuable fur animals in the world, but Wang didn't want them for their fur. He wanted them for what they did to trees. Here's what nobody had realized. As young willow trees grow, they send out lateral branches, small side shoots that steal energy from the main trunk. If these branches aren't pruned, the tree becomes sprawling and weak. Its roots don't go deep. It can't anchor itself in the sand. Pruning thousands of acres of trees by hand? Impossible. Economically and physically impossible. But Rex rabbits love young willow shoots. Release them into the planted areas, and they do the pruning naturally, nibbling back the side branches, forcing all the tree's energy downward into the roots. The trunk thickens. The roots drive deeper. The tree becomes a pillar of strength in the sand. And that wasn't all. Their droppings became fertilizer, feeding nutrients into soil that had none. And as they grazed on grasses, they carried seeds in their fur and digestive systems, spreading plant life across miles of terrain that had been barren for decades. Within a few years, where there had been only dust, there was grass. Let's stop for a moment and absorb what had just happened. A businessman, some straw grids, a drought-resistant tree, and a rabbit had done what the Chinese government, with all its resources, had failed to do for 30 years. The dunes were stabilizing. The temperature at ground level was dropping because vegetation creates shade and retains moisture, which cools the microclimate. Birds returned, insects returned, and where insects return, pollination follows. Where pollination follows and more plants grow. The ecosystem was beginning to breathe again, but Wang wasn't finished. He understood something profound. You cannot sustain an ecological project without economic sustainability. If the people living around Kubuqi couldn't make a living from the restored land, they would abandon it. And without human maintenance, the desert would reclaim everything. So he did something brilliant. He turned the desert into a business. The Rex rabbits weren't just ecological tools. They became an economic engine. Their wool was sold to luxury fashion houses in Europe. The meat was sold to restaurants. The farming operation employed thousands of local families who had previously had nothing. Then came the solar panels. The Kubuqi Desert receives more sunlight per year than almost anywhere else on Earth. That curse, the relentless, scorching sun, became an asset. Wang's team installed one of the world's largest solar farms, right in the middle of the reclaimed desert. 196,000 solar panels arranged across the landscape in the shape of a galloping horse, visible from space. The plant now generates 2.3 billion kilowatt hours of electricity every single year. But here's the genius part. The solar panels don't just generate electricity, they shade the ground beneath them, reducing evaporation and keeping moisture in the soil. Grass grows better in their shadow. That grass feeds the rabbits and the sheep. The animals fertilize the soil further. Technology and nature feeding each other in a perfect self-sustaining loop. This wasn't just environmental science. This was genius. This was a system where every single part served every other part. The rabbit helped the tree. The tree helped the soil. The soil helped the grass. The grass helped the animals. The animals helped the people. And the people protected the land, round and round. forever. Today, the numbers are staggering. 6,000 square kilometers of the Kubuqi Desert have been completely reclaimed. 6,000! That is an area larger than the entire country of Trinidad and Tobago, transformed from dead sand into living, breathing ecosystem in less than 4 decades. More than 100,000 people have been lifted out of poverty through the businesses that the reclamation project created. The biodiversity of the region has exploded. Over 530 species of plants, 79 species of wildlife, and 182 species of birds now inhabit an area that was, within living memory, a dead zone. And perhaps most remarkably, the temperature in the region has dropped. The annual rainfall has increased. Because vegetation changes microclimates. It pulls moisture from the air. It creates conditions for rain that didn't exist before. The desert didn't just stop growing. It began to shrink. Let that sink in for a moment. A desert that was consuming 500,000 acres every year started shrinking because of one man, some straw, a tree, and a rabbit. The United Nations took notice. In 2017, the Kubuqi Desert became only the second site in the world to be designated a UN ecosystem restoration flagship. International scientists, policymakers, and environmental engineers have visited from over 100 countries, not to study a success story, but to copy a blueprint. The Kubuqi model is now being applied to deserts in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, because what Wang Wenbiao proved in Kubuqi wasn't just that this desert could be saved. He proved that any desert can be saved. If you're willing to think differently, commit completely, and refuse to accept the word impossible. Think about that moment in 1988, when Wang stood at the edge of that burning wasteland. No money yet spent, no proof that anything would work, every expert around him saying, "This is futile, this has never been done, you will fail." And he looked at 18,000 square kilometers of death, and he chose to begin. Not because he had all the answers, not because success was guaranteed, but because he believed that beginning was the only thing required of him. The rest would follow. There's a lesson here that goes far beyond ecology. We live in an age where the problems feel too big. Climate change, poverty, degraded land, dying oceans, and it's easy to look at the scale of those problems and feel paralyzed. But Kubuqi is proof that scale is not an obstacle to a person with the right idea and the right commitment. Wang didn't try to fix the whole desert at once. He fixed one grid, then another, then another. He didn't wait for a perfect plan. He started with straw and shrubs, the most humble materials imaginable. He didn't look for a single dramatic solution. He built a system, and that system changed the world. The Kubuqi Desert was called the Sea of Death for a reason. Nothing was supposed to grow there. Nothing was supposed to survive there. And for most of human history, nothing did. But today, if you fly over Kubuqi in a plane, you will see something that will stop your breath. Green. Mile after mile after mile of green. A forest where there was once only sand. A river restored. Animals running through land that was silent for decades. Children growing up in a place their grandparents had abandoned. One man, one idea, one rabbit, and the will to begin. History doesn't remember the people who waited for the right moment. It remembers the people who made the moment right. This is the silent epic vault, where we strip away the dust of time and find the roots of history.